What's up, everybody? I'm David Hain. Welcome to episode 177 of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, follow, and share the link with your friends. And can I ask you to do me a favor? Can you get 2 friends to listen to this episode and then make time to chat about it with them? If you'd like to get our curriculum, you can get the paperback or ebook of From Ashes to Destiny on Amazon. When we get back, we'll get into this episode entitled Quicksand and Second Wind. Welcome back to episode 177 of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast entitled Quicksand and Second Wind. This episode is going to look at those times when we feel like we're stuck in quicksand and we begin to feel like we're going to get swallowed up by it. But what really happens to a person in quicksand? Well, those people that happen to die in quicksand do not typically die from sinking in and getting swallowed up by it, but rather from exposure to the elements due to being stranded, being sort of stuck in there from the waist down. You see, a person can float in quicksand, and that's because the quicksand is denser than the human body. So when we can get stuck in it, we don't get sucked down to the bottom because our lungs are lighter than the density of the quicksand and they cause us to float. So we need to stop struggling, call out, and wait for help. But I'm not here to teach you what to do if you actually get caught physically in quicksand. You see, some people are quicksand to us. And the interesting thing that I've found over the years is that we get help and we get out of toxic relationships, out of those quicksand relationships. But once we get in recovery and we're starting to get our life back together, we still try to go back to those toxic people and make things right. We go back to the very quicksand that we broke free from. So how should we handle toxic relationships or situations that we find ourselves stuck in? I'm going to look at 3 different aspects. The first one, I'm going to say, deal with it. And this is when you just need to deal with the fact of that quicksand that you're stuck in, that situation, that toxic relationship. And so this typically focuses on coping skills. You might be stuck and there's no way that you can change it, so you just need to learn how to live with it. But the problem can be if we focus on just dealing with it, we often fail to process it. We just push through it or endure it or try to get past it like it never happened or it didn't have a major impact on us. And that can be the leading cause of us trying to return to the quicksand people in our life once we've gotten out of the relationship and gone to rehab or established recovery, because we've never actually looked at the impact that that relation had in our lives. We just sort of dealt with it a day at a time. So the second area that I'm going to look at is going to be called process it. And for me, this is a more systematic approach where you try to identify and analyze the situation. Maybe look at the causes and how the situation has affected your thoughts and feelings. And then develop a way to learn from it and grow. But we can get hung up if we are so focused on processing it that we get all up in our head and we analyze every detail from an intellectual perspective to ensure it never happens again. And if we're just keeping it at the intellectual level, we're not really processing how it's affecting us. And we tend to get up in our head about things that, were results and effects on other people. Like we can get caught up in how long it's been since we've been able to be with our kids again and things like that. And so when we're analyzing, we have to stop counting the days that we lost. Because if we get caught up in that, soon the future will only look like a long, cold, lonely winter. And we can't get stuck in that winter feeling either. Instead, we can analyze each of our thoughts as we process it with the focus of identifying irrational and negative thoughts that we are having. And I want to urge you to write them down, list them when you identify them so that you can talk them over with a coach, a counselor, a sponsor, a good friend. So that from those irrational and negative thoughts, you can identify and develop rational thoughts and rational thinking, which is based on the reality of the situation. And we can shift our focus onto positive thoughts about our future. So you see how processing it this way can really be restorative and healing in the midst of being therapeutic into the quicksand sort of thing we were caught in. Okay, the third area I'm going to call feel it. And by feel it, I mean fully, deeply. Inhale it, breathe it, take it in, and feel it in a way that you realize it's, part of the oxygen that's keeping you going. And I believe that when we can see how it's impacted us, how this quicksand, how this toxic relationship has impacted us, we can learn and grow from it. And some of the impacts could be physical things like lack of appetite, sleeplessness, restlessness. They can be emotional things like anger, mood swings, depression, lack of motivation. And I think it's important that we identify and acknowledge each of our feelings, emotional and physical, because we can often feel drained of the energy to keep moving forward while we're in the midst of feeling this stuff and processing it. So it's so important to me to find our second wind. The Oxford Dictionary defines second wind as a person's ability to breathe freely during exercise after having been out of breath. And when I think of this, I think of many runners who find their second wind as they get close to the finish line. I've run one marathon in my life, and that thing happened to me as I could hear the cheers of people at the finish line, even though I couldn't see it. It gave me the burst of energy to make it all the way in the marathon, and gave the friend that I was running with that same burst of energy, even though we both felt like quitting from sort of the halfway point on in. And I think it's important to realize we all have that second wind inside of us. No matter how many times we've sat down and stopped to catch our breath, no matter how many times we've felt like quitting and just going home, that second wind is in us. It's sort of like the light at the end of a tunnel. It's when we have a momentary thought that I can get through this. I can make it to the finish line. There are better days ahead. And I think it's important to realize that getting our second wind is our way to process our way through quicksand relationships, quicksand situations, and understand that there are better days ahead. We can get through this into a better future. So in closing, I want to remind each of you that we need to recognize when there's even the slightest appearance of our second wind, just the slightest breeze in the air, so to speak, and we have to tap into it and find the burst of energy and the belief that we'll make it. When we do, it feels like riding the wave after weeks or months of swimming against the waves. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather be riding the crest of the wave of my second wind than standing stagnant, waist deep in quicksand with the fear that I was going to get swallowed up. Thanks for listening to this episode of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast. If you were saying that's me, I'm stuck in quicksand right now, David, or how do I find my second wind? Then it's time now to reach out and join a group. You can message me in the link in this podcast or by email at davidfroma2d@gmail.com or go to my website www.froma2d.org and click on the contact page. If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave your comments by clicking on the link that will be right there on your screen as you're listening. Tune in Monday for our next episode, and as always, stay safe and stay strong.